So we are live on YouTube. Let me close this computer. All right. Everybody ready?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. So this is Rain Talks. This is episode 11. I'm Matthew. My co-host is Aishu. 11th episode, Rain Talks with Cogeo, Rob Cusel. Am I saying that right?
Correct.
Perfect. And Patrick Sampson are here with us today. Aisha has a quick intro, and then we'll get rolling.
Yeah. So quick intro for Cogeo is a company that specializes in 501c3 fundraising. And their work is with client partners that span every 501c3 sector and every geographical region of the United States. They have over 50 years of fundraising experience and have raised over $650 million for more than 150 nonprofit organizations. So like Matt said, joining us today are Rob Cusel and Patrick Sampson. Rob is the Managing Director of Consulting Services at Cogeo, while Patrick Sampson is the CEO of Cogeo. Thanks for joining us today. And if you guys have any more to add to that introduction, take it away.
Patrick, can you hear us? No, we can't hear you. That's why we do it live, because it's more fun this way.
I'll say a few things while we wait for Patrick.
Yeah.
So one of the sectors we work fairly aggressively in is sports. Anything sports related, from clubs to academies to governing bodies and state governing bodies as well. And so Patrick and I have a deep background in soccer. And so it's very natural for us to understand what the challenges are. When I mean deep backgrounds, both as players at the collegiate level, beyond, and then as myself as a coach at elite levels, up until my family moved to Richmond in 2014. So that's all I want to add in terms of the specificity of what we're discussing today as it relates to academies and clubs and fundraising to really help sustain their capabilities over time. And the last thing I'll say before I pass to Patrick is, in terms of market penetration, very, very little. So if you're a club and you're considering doing this, you would be one of the first out of the gate. So everything is really making the market at this point.
Yeah.
And we say that only because we know it, because we're really the only player out there that knows this market and works with this market. So that's all I want to add for now.
Yeah, thank you. Patrick, can we hear you now?
I think I'm here now. Yeah, thank you.
Good.
We're on. Apologies, I was getting tripped up by the password.
No worries. So tell us a little bit more about kind of the founding of Cogeo. Rob just kind of went over, you guys are very, very large in soccer and in sports, and have really serious backgrounds in the sport. So can you tell us a little bit about how Cogeo came to be?
Yeah, it's a really exciting story. So as we mentioned briefly, we both have backgrounds in soccer, and it just so happened that the path that we're on today is to revert back to that, really with a passion, but in a different way, right? And so the path that led to that, for me personally, was first working after college as a investment advisor. So I had a family business that allowed me an opportunity to, at a very high level, get into managing money for individuals and companies. And there I learned a lot about just how the world works and a lot of the core fundamentals of our system. And part of what we did in that practice was to inspire people to engage with philanthropy as a way of either satisfying a philanthropic desire and or managing their wealth. Ironically, sometimes philanthropy can be a tool for doing so. And that's something that really sparked a passion in me, so much so that I felt that I wanted to dedicate my entire career to that. And so that's really where the birth of, Cogeo works with organizations that are involved with philanthropy as 501c3s and others. But that's really where the passion for me came into the fold to start the company. And the company originally was an online platform. So think what GoFundMe charity is today. That in essence was originally the name of the company was called Cogeo. That was the iterative vision of that company. So think for those that are a bit more tech savvy, it was a Facebook meets Kickstarter meets Netflix. So you'd have a profile as a donor, as a philanthropist, as a nonprofit, and then they would match you with projects that are going on. So, think District Rain has a page. People find you through an algorithm because of your desire for supporting whatever it is you like about District Rain, and the system would match you. It just so happened it was way ahead of its time and still is, in my opinion, for where the philanthropic market is. So about a year and a half after doing that, we entered into, at that time, there were only 6% of all money was being given online. So the vast majority was being given offline. So I said, we need to iterate into a company that more comprehensively serves this market. And I had met Rob about 6 months before that decision was made. And he was naturally the absolute best partner, both from just a personnel standpoint, but also from a background and experience and philosophical standpoint. So that was about 5 years ago that occurred. And then from there, we've taken that intention and gone into every sector of the nonprofit industry to help them really understand fundraising comprehensively and at the same time help them grow their organizations programmatically.
Yeah. You guys have grown a lot since being web-based and have tackled a lot of really large projects since then.
Yeah, I was going to ask, when you start working with a nonprofit and you want to help them raise a certain amount of money or they have a goal themselves, what are some certain things that you look at first when you want to help them achieve that goal?
That's a really good question. So there are invariably different sizes of organizations, right? There's everything from a startup to the Red Cross or a big university. There's 1.74 million nonprofits in the U.S. 94% of those have less than $500,000 in assets. So the industry is very top heavy from a small organization standpoint. So generally speaking, fundraising to those organizations it's still very new. They haven't really done it professionally yet. So the first thing that we do is we come in and really understand what have you been doing and what has been successful for you thus far, and really get a gauge on where they're at on their path of getting to a place where they have a full, robust fundraising program in the future, right? Before we do any of that, though, we look at the leadership, because the leadership really is the key at the end of the day. No matter what size you are as an organization, that has the greatest correlator to the success of the organization. And generally, it's people that are open to understanding that they know that they don't know things, that they want to come in and be learners and be engaged, because unlike other industries where you have professional education in the industry, maybe marketing or finance or something like that, there still isn't a lot. There's a few, but there still aren't a lot of very formalized educational opportunities to learn high-level fundraising as a practice. So generally, people get into the industry, either they've had some experience in PR or marketing, but they generally, even at entry level or beyond jobs, don't have the real robust experience. So we start there with people. We get an understanding of where they are, where they want to go, and our process, we can naturally map out how we're going to get there. But we really, from the very beginning conversation, talk about who the leaders are, both on the staff and the board of the organization. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to be right alongside us as a partner to execute.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's an important part of any organization. Do they have the leadership to carry them into what's next, or are they going to stay treading water?
Yeah, with any change, right? And this is a big fundamental change, especially for clubs and academies, because to be more specific into this sector, they've been doing this within a model that doesn't incorporate fundraising, to Rob's point, at all, really. This is all new. So the only thing that they have done is membership-based revenue models, and to come in and incorporate fundraising into that, it's a big shift for leadership. It's a big fundamental ask for someone to commit to. I think everyone agrees that at the end of the day, what the fundraising will enable is what they want. But sometimes it's really difficult for people to get to a place, at least initially, where they want to take that leap into this next era. And so I think it takes really strong leadership to both identify that it's a priority at a club and an academy, and frankly, any nonprofit, and then also dedicate themselves to the seriousness of actually executing that process. Rob, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, that was thorough.
I think in soccer, it's at least in America, it's what's been done for so long that I think that the industry in general hasn't seen that shift away from, charging the client or the player to accomplish their goal.
You're exactly right. The pay-to-play model has been the model in the U.S. And the irony is the fundraising is the answer to mitigate that. Because the only other option that you have, well, you have a couple of other options, but the main two are programmatic revenue of some kind, so membership dues, they represent that, and then fundraising. And what we have seen for clubs that have been innovative in this process and taken that leap of faith at the very beginning, they're now the ones that are obtaining strategic advantages against their competitors by having more money to attract the best coaches, to pay them market rates, to offer them the best training, to offer financial aid in a way that enables what everyone wants, which is that the participation is based on skill or desire rather than financial capacity. And then resources for facilities as well. Renting a facility versus owning a facility is a very different financial reality for a club. And so when we've been able to work with clubs to actualize their own facilities, it now becomes even a revenue stream for them rather than one that they were outlaying money for. So, it's really compelling. And I think that for the clubs in all environments, by the way, not just wealthy environments, but we've done it in the whole spectrum of economic realities for clubs, and there's ways to do it. It is possible, and it is transformative.
And the most striking example, I'll tell you, in terms of pay to play and fundraising, and I mean comprehensive fundraising, not throw spaghetti at the wall and hope it comes, in terms of an event or whatever, is the community of San Francisco, right? Where we began work 2.5 years ago, I think it was about then, with San Francisco Elite Academy. in the course of that time, produced transformational results, which allowed them literally to cover their entire financial aid budget for a club that was committed from its founding in 2014 to be totally accessible for any socioeconomic group, regardless of their capacity to play. And what happened there is that $130,000 annual budget, which we were able to raise for the next 3 years, they're covered. They were able to take those funds and then redirect them toward coaching and getting excellent coaching. And so they're really the elite club now in San Francisco. But my point is this: in the last 6 months, we signed 2 other major clubs in San Francisco because they saw what happened there, and they don't want to not be part of what could happen. And that's San Francisco Youth Soccer, which governs all youth soccer in San Francisco, and then another club, a very big club, San Francisco United, an NPL club. And they themselves acknowledged that they saw what happened at Elite Academy and felt that if they didn't move, that they would be falling behind, to Patrick's point. And both engagements are going extremely well. That's all I want to add.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think financially, the trickle down to development is very impactful, because if you have a player that's not worried about, paying for different financial things, then they can truly develop. And then that, I think, pushes some of the other clubs, like, this has been taken off of this player, now they're going to develop maybe even faster. So then now we're competing with them beyond finances.
That's exactly it. And I mean, there's so much evidence in so many different areas where when you eliminate those stressful factors, both for a family unit, because at the end of the day, that's who that individual is a part of, but also for themselves personally, that minimization of that stress creates and cultivates an environment for what we're personally passionate about beyond just the player development on the physical side, is the mental and the leadership component into being a lifelong contributor to the communities and being leaders. As we all know, the game fosters that opportunity when the right leadership and the right environments are mixed together for youth. And so you're absolutely right. There's so many layers to that, where the trickle down really just has to be initiated from that first point of the financial resources, and then the leadership can do their thing. It's remarkable.
Yeah, when it comes to raising that much money, how much of that work that organization has to do is focused on marketing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we sent along a link to, I believe, you two all before the presentation, which had a graphic which we call the House of Development. It's cogeo.us/library for anyone that wants to follow along. And this is our visual way of describing all of the elements that are involved with a fully mature fundraising program.
I can put it up here.
It doesn't mean that, okay, great.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that that's what they should be doing immediately, right away, from day one, all these things. In fact, for an organization that has done little to no fundraising, they shouldn't be doing everything. It's too much. But it gives people an understanding of all the different areas where funds come from. So I want to walk through this briefly. And it sequentially goes from the bottom, starting at that place, all the way to the top over time in its maturity, and builds on itself. That's why we call it the House of Development. So the first entry point is PR, website, social media, e-newsletters, basically the funnel of media to your communities. By the way, the only path to new donors, and this is a mantra we have, is through existing donors. If you cultivate your community and do the work that we know works, that's the only path, the most efficient way to new and exponential resources. So it all starts with that core community and engaging them with quality content. The first room on the left there, annual and membership giving, that's defined by saying you're not having a one-on-one meeting with an individual, but rather you're doing a mass appeal online where you're having what we call push-pull strategies. So you're putting out a message, it might be the end of the year appeal or a whole community appeal digitally. That's annual giving. So generally we have a threshold of that type of gift is less than 1/10 of 1% of your annual budget. So it would be, I believe, $100,000. The major gift would be $100 for that, if I'm doing my math right. Anything above that would then be what's considered a major gift, which we'll get to that in a moment, but that's the room on the second floor there. Events, which is the room on the right side of the bottom floor, that can be anything from a gala, which for a small organization we highly recommend most of the time not to do because it's very intensive resource necessity, and the return on investment is only about 50% on average, versus other areas have a much higher return. But there are other types of events that are really meaningful to do right away, and those are things like cultivation events, where you have a small gathering at a home. The leadership of an organization would have 10 minutes to speak about why their community is so important to them and why this is so important to the community. Field questions. It's really just that. It's cultivating and then engaging. To answer your question about marketing, every single element of the house is a form of marketing. But the way that you're marketing it in a sales pitch, basically, is different based on tactic. For corporations and foundations, it's a different type of marketing. It's much more return on investment based and metric based. Although individuals really do enjoy that, especially for companies, it's a two-way street for them in terms of value. So when we talk about sponsorships for a club, or we talk about any other type of corporate giving, generally they want to see how many, in the best development practices, how many people are seeing our logo, how many people are having an interaction with our product. It might be a local physical therapy company that wants to gain access to a community. So there's different types of things there. For foundations, it can be much broader, especially for a club. For example, a foundation might not be as interested in the athletic component of supporting a club, but they could be really on board with equity issues or issues of health generally, or it can be leadership development. So there's a lot of different angles you can take with foundations. And that's its own type of strategy that involves a lot of what we call triangulation through relationships. So knowing who's on a board at a foundation, it's a very personal interaction process. Major gifts is when you're sitting down with an individual making a specific ask who has what we call a AAA 3 characteristic. They have affinity for what you're doing. They have access into their community, and or they have affluence themselves, so the capacity to give money. And generally that's done more on a one-on-one basis, where you're sitting down and having a conversation, as opposed to the annual membership giving. And there's supporting collateral that you have in that process, where you give someone either before the meeting or during the meeting what we call a case statement. And there's some examples on our website. It's a great marketing tool. It's the first thing we do with any club that we work with or any client, is to create the case statement. It basically describes who they are, what they do, what their timeline is for accomplishing the goals, what costs are associated with that, and then who's involved, so that it clearly articulates the whole ecosystem of why we're fundraising. That major gift strategy is very much driven by marketing tactics of individual engagement. So sitting down with coffee, nowadays having a Zoom meeting. But generally people, they have to start receiving your messaging on that first floor first before they can get up to the second level. So they might have attended a cultivation event and received some communication from you there. And then as an output of that, they'll agree to sit down with you and have a meeting, just as an example. Or maybe they've engaged with you online a couple of times with small donations. Well, maybe it's time to move them up into that major gift category and start to do that work with them. So those 5 comprise what we typically call year-over-year fundraising. And it's the tactics within each of those areas that involve different types of marketing strategies and engagement strategies to ultimately support the programmatic aspects of what you're doing. So financial aid, coaching, education, and equipment. When you get into the ADDIC, the capital campaign, that's a term that basically correlates directly with a strategy to raise money for a physical asset of size, like a facility. So you would run a capital campaign at a university for a new academic wing or a new gymnasium. At a club, you would run a capital campaign most likely for a new set of fields or a complex. And so unlike the annual giving strategies, those are strategies that are usually multi-year based, so 3 to 5 years. And they just have a different way of engaging people within the entire process. It has multiple steps to it, and there's a great webinar that we've done on it that goes into detail, but that, it correlates to the ones below it, but it's a different type of strategy when you're at the end of the day looking for a facility. Plan gifts are more of a long-term component. It is, and this is where marketing becomes very heavily involved proactively. It is a ask of people to consider leaving your organization in their will because they've had such a positive experience or think what you're doing is so special that their estate should share some of their assets with your organization. Now, when you're just starting, plan gifts, we don't launch those generally until about at least 5 years into a fundraising campaign with people. It's just a progressionary thing.
Yeah.
The last piece is the transformational gifts. That's the roof. A transformational gift is when something is given at such a high dollar amount, and you can't really market for these, but rather all the work that you do in all the other rooms of the house, they promote the likelihood of the transformational gift. It's a gift that's so big that it fundamentally changes your ability as an organization to deliver your mission. So it could be District Rain getting a 20-field soccer complex gifted to them. That would be a transformational gift, right? In the sense of just such a big change from where it was before that it enables you to do things you never did. The 2 most famous examples of those are the Kroc estate, when they gave to NPR to endow independent journalism in perpetuity, and the Kroc estate's gift to the Salvation Army. So I believe it was $2 billion to the Salvation Army, and I think $500 million or $1 billion to NPR for those 2 elements. And the Kroc estate was the McDonald's heiress, so Roy Kroc's wife when she passed away. But a transformational gift can be, for a small club, a $500,000 gift, even a $30,000 gift. There's no magic number for that. But it truly is something when it happens and when you do everything really well, it's so exciting for a club. So I know that's a lot of information. I know it correlates back originally to your question about marketing, and my intention of walking through all that was to display that a lot of those things happen simultaneously and do so in a way that can be concurrent and building upon one another. Generally speaking, when we start with an organization, we start with one or a few of those that have the highest return on investment, which are major gifts and annual giving, and sometimes events. And we build up the program over time and teach our clients how to do those things so that they can start to not only grow those within their areas, but also start to become self-sufficient in doing it themselves.
That was super informative. Thank you. Yeah.
I think that graphic is really well laid out, and I think that the approach is well done based on the pathways, right? Because you're not going to be able to get a transformational gift probably without having gone through the other floors of the house. And I think it shows us how much relationships go into this and how much cultivation is important, because a random stranger is not going to make that major gift, probably, right? It's a lot of it is based on those relationships.
You have one of the most experienced people in the world with that on the phone, in Rob. The industry started in the 80s at the universities, and that's where best business practices are today. That whole house that you just saw, they're doing all those things simultaneously and on like 100 miles an hour at such a high level. And so that's where those practices started. And the people that entered into that space were in their middle of their careers, because they generally were lawyers or other professionals. So now they're either retired or, unfortunately, they're no longer with us. But the whole wave behind that first wave, there's still a big gap there in terms of the education of people's understanding about how to do this work and guide organizations to do it. But in Rob's case, he was able to get into the industry at age 22. So instead of being 40 when the industry really started, he was at the very beginning of his career. So I think he'll be able to, with that context, give you, based on his experience, just how important that relationship piece is and the stewardship component. I think he'll be able to give us even more in-depth context for that. So Rob, would you like to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the easy part of fundraising is making the ask. That's really easy. I want you to consider a $1,000 gift in this area for this year. That's easy to do, and it's only once a year. But the most important thing are the moves that occur between asks, right? So if a donor has been given in October of a given year, then what's happening between October and the next October? And that's where, to your point, Matt, it's all about relationship management. And so we've got all these tactics that we impose on our clients as it relates to stewardship, which is really nothing other than acknowledging the effect and the impact of their investment in the club. And generally we do it on a quarterly basis, which is to say somebody's given $2,000 to the club, which would be about $500 impact per quarter. Then the messaging to that donor family is just that. Your $500 this quarter enabled us to do this, this, and this. And then you have other layers of stewardship. Maybe a player or whomever's benefiting from their investment might also be asked to write a short note or an email. So you're absolutely right. It's all about managing relationships. And then the other thing that's really important in the industry, there was a major study done by a Canadian individual and an American individual. They did a longitudinal study on behaviors of major donors. And what they found, most importantly, their main recommendation was this. And this is really important, the only path to new donors are existing donors, right? So if I were asking Patrick for an investment, I would say, Patrick, I want you to consider a 5-year pledge at $1,000 a year. He's going to say, maybe no. And once I'm done with that, okay, Patrick, now that you know our story and what we're trying to accomplish with this renovation campaign, who else in your network needs to be engaged, much like we just engaged you? And then Patrick's going to think, and he may have people, he may not, but that's how we usually operate. And when Patrick was talking about cultivation events, that's exactly what that is, right? It's having a host bring in other individuals to their home or wherever, and essentially having the executive director, the director of coaching, telling the current story and engaging families in the process of considering to invest beyond just their dues, those who have capacity. The other thing we do that's really important with our clients is we take their membership, all the data from their membership, and do a thorough well screening. Right, so beyond corporate and foundations, that well screening gives us a real scientific look into what their membership is actually worth. Patrick, do you want to talk a little bit more about the mechanics of the well screening and what it does?
Yeah, sure. So with this, just as an aside, you can see based on what we're talking, just how much more robust offline relationship management is versus online systems, right? And so when I discovered this and I met Rob, I said, this has got to expand. If we want to have the biggest impact that we can. I mean, offline systems or online systems are growing at 16, 17% a year, but they're still really small. And in my opinion, and I think a lot of people share this, not as impactful if exclusively done with stewardship as that personal engagement with someone online. So reverting back to the three characteristics for a major donor, the AAA prospects, the affluence, affinity, and access. Part of that is within the last 2 years, there have been technologies that have come out that allowed us to really understand one of those to a level that we never had before, which is that affluence piece. And it really is in sales. It's no different. You want to sell to the customer that has the ability to buy your product. And you want to sell the right product to that person. So if you won't offend them if you ask them for too much money, but you definitely have a sense going into a meeting of what your ask is going to be. It's either going to be open-ended or it's going to be specific based on your understanding of their capacity to make a gift. And so the systems and tools that we now have access to, and this is especially important when it comes to clubs and academies, we're able to screen an entire database on a holistic level versus a one-on-one level to get a real robust estimate of their net worth of assets minus liabilities. And so when we work with clients, it's really an art and a science dance. It's, okay, we've got the raw information of the science back from our technology, but we want to go down this list one by one with you and understand what your relationships are with these people. And so in a way that even 2 years ago wasn't possible to optimize your activity, a small nonprofit can now, instead of guessing because someone drives a fancy car or you have rumors about them being in a different place financially, you have that information available to you. And as Rob mentioned, the changes to that have really been, there was one or a few companies that would do individual screenings one-on-one. So you would give them Patrick Sampson's name and it would give you Patrick Sampson back. We now can do the whole entire membership at once dynamically. That's really a revolutionary change. The second one is the depth of the information. So the old ones were pulling from, kind of in my old world, the K1s reports and basically the investment information that's public that has people's names on it. So how many shares they would have in a company, things like that, trust companies, properties. Now they have public and private relationships that are, I should say, proprietary in a certain sense that they have access to their information, but not proprietary from the sense the data is like secretive. But there's a company out of San Francisco whom we've partnered with called Windfall Data. And they're two data scientists that decided they wanted to take their skill set away from for-profit tech into the nonprofit space to do just what we're talking about and push algorithmic numbers even further to having robust information scientifically. So that's just been incredible. There's another sports organization, a large Olympic governing body that we worked with that had over 450,000 members in it. And they had no clue that 25% of their membership base were millionaires and above. So from an operational standpoint, that is a huge fundamental bit of information for them to allocate resources, right? They, before we started working with them, had one full-time employee working on fundraising. And that employee was also getting pulled in multiple directions. So it gave the board an entirely different set of information to say, wow, we actually have so much we haven't gone after over here that logically can support all the other things that we need to be doing. It makes sense for us to put more resources into that. So beyond even just the actual one-on-one with donors, it's given organizations more information about what potential they have for their fundraising dollars to come into the organization. And quite frankly, it's very surprising on the high end for a lot of clubs. That's the general feedback that we have, is that they just didn't have an idea at all that they had that much capacity within their club.
Yeah, that's massive.
I'm muted. Okay, there we go. I'm thinking, imagine finding that out when you're in need of needing those funds at some point.
Yeah. And I also want to mention that company and Cogeo alike, we take privacy really seriously. And so that's not shared with people. When we give information to the company, it's not shared or sold. And that was something that we were so delighted to find in a partner, not only for transforming the industry, but nowadays to have a partner that really commits to that. It's rare. And, a lot of clients ask us about that. If you didn't know that your information is somewhere, I hate to be the one to give you that information, but it is everywhere. And so it's becoming a new normal that people are expected to be okay with. And when we work with that type of information, we push it to the extent of it not being shared or public, or we go as far in our contracts to have a very strong clause about that. I know that's something that people are sometimes concerned with, but I think it's important information to share.
Kind of moving on a different path. You guys mostly work with sports teams, sports nonprofits. Have you had and I'm sure you've had the opportunity to work with like other kinds of nonprofits. How different is it when it comes to working with a sports nonprofit versus a nonprofit in a different industry?
Yeah, I'll take that one.
I'm glad that you, oh yeah, go ahead, Rob. Go ahead.
No, I'll start, then you can finish. So here's the deal. There are what's called best business practices in fund development and organizational management for the 501c3, right? And so regardless of their mission, and we work with many more 501c3s that are not sports related, ironically, in our history. Again, as I said earlier, this is a market that's being made, whereas most other sectors are fairly mature. The most mature of which are the medical and then educational sectors, and social services coming in close. But no, what we do is we impose the exact same tactical initiatives to every one of our clients, regardless of their mission. So that when someone, for example, when we're in discovery with a potential partner or client, and if they're a zoo, and they may say something like, "Have you ever worked with an organization like ours before?" And our answer is irrelevant, moot, right? I mean, we're not that rude, but we say it very nicely. But I'm doing this dramatically because I want to make a really important point, which is it doesn't matter what their mission is. This is about business, right? So the word nonprofit, we don't use in our company. We use 501c3. Okay, it's a classification. Who's going to call Harvard a nonprofit as they're sitting on a multi-billion-dollar endowment? Right? It's not. It's a false equivalency, right? Mm-hmm. So when we look at a 501c3, to Patrick's point earlier, we look at where they are on their trajectory in terms of the house of development. What have they done from the bottom up? And then what should they be, given their resources and our resources, given how we're structured, what should they attack in year 1, year 2, year 3, and then grow thereafter? So there is no difference in how we engage with any 501c3 or for-profit company for that matter. And that's really important to understand.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I mentioned at the very beginning, which is leadership, right? So when Rob says that to someone in a business development meeting, pre-client partnership with them, their reaction to that statement tells us everything, right? Because if they're hearing us at the zoo, as that example, say, we have experience working with zoos, we can give you information about what we did with that, but it's really irrelevant. Their reaction to that statement is what gives us all the information about who they are as leaders. do they have a preconceived notion that's going to get in their way of doing really successful work? Or are they going to be really receptive to that and take that in and say, oh my gosh, okay, great. I'm soaking up all this education. I want to be a part of this.
Yeah.
Tell me where to go next. You know, it gives us all the clues and all the context into that. It's a great question, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We get it all the
and
time.
the only exception to that rule would be an agency, a 501c3, whose mission may be considered society kind of difficult, right? And we just ran into it. We had a conversation with the association, with an association which deals with sexual abusers, right? They're essentially trying to help them in a really good way. However, it's tough to sell. So their board asked us that question. Yeah. Have you worked with an organization which has a difficult mission to sell, right? Mm-hmm. And there we had to honor their request. Absolutely. And we gave one very, very credible example of a substance abuse and incarceration reentry program client that's massively present in California. And that really helped the board, beyond just the best business practices, understand that we were actually a really good fit for them. So there are instances where you have to do that. And that's really the only area that I can think of from a sector standpoint. Yeah.
For me,
and the other component is when you tell that to a board member at a club, you know it's a really good set of leaders when they identify and connect the dots between we don't have any of this in our industry, this other industry is doing this really well, and we can take advantage of being one of the first ones to do it, right?
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask about, because I know that the nonprofit or the 501c3 industry is so based in community and based in helping people that a lot of times we can lose sight of the business side and putting things together like that. The for-profits are doing this so well. They're bringing in all these things. They're connecting all the dots. So how are you guys as a organization kind of changing that model to go forward?
That's such a good question. I'm so glad you asked it. We have a belief internally at Cogeo and externally, but we work really closely with our clients from day one on this, that the 501c3 tax code is merely a tax code that requires two things. You have no shareholders and that you have a charitable purpose, which can be very vague as defined by the code. So the only difference between a for-profit company and a 501c3, whether you're a nonprofit, charity, foundation, we can go over that later about how we define those. That's it. I mean, you're delivering on your mission might be, of course, very different from a mission of a for-profit company, but in terms of how you operate the business, the goal should always be to maximize your mission and have the resources to maximize your mission. So we actually think that there's a huge opportunity for a rebranding of the 501c3 industry and to attract a lot more talent. Not to say that it shouldn't remain. Let me go back and give you some definitions of words first before I go into this. The 501c3 industry is all 1.74 million nonprofits, which is about 3% of GDP. Of those, we break them down into two categories. Charities, which are, think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs at the bottom. So they're your food banks and your homeless shelters and some of the other examples that Rob mentioned. And then the ones that are not charities are nonprofits within the 501c3 industry, right? Foundations are organizations that are 501c3 organizations that give away money, whereas nonprofits are those that are like clubs, they raise money, right? Community foundations kind of do both. But that's how we articulate, and there's no set verbiage in this. But when you ask someone what, and I'm going to use this word intentionally, when you think of a nonprofit, what do you think of? they think it's the antithesis of a for-profit company in branding. They think of it as a charity, right? But there's so much opportunity to leverage the 501c3 tax code to do non-charitable work, as I've defined a charity. So think of any company like Amazon, Lyft, Facebook, anything. It can be a 501c3. There's no rule against it being a 501c3. One of the defining characteristics when you apply for your status is a reduction of burden on government to operate. Well, you can pretty much say that any of those organizations, like Lyft, for example, that's reducing the burden of a public transportation system by having a rideshare system, right? I mean, it depends how you operate it, but that's really what we try to get at with clients is you are a charity per se. If you are a charity, you still should operate like a 501c3 or a for-profit business. And so we're very entrepreneurial in the way that we do development work. And the development work translates into the equivalent basically of sales, but it's sales for your mission. And more often than not, it's incredibly authentic in the way that you're able to do it, which makes it that much more, in our opinion, fun and engaging and worthwhile for us to do it. So yeah, I know that's a lot of information, but I think it's really important as it contextualizes your question that we're on a mission as well, simultaneously, to not only empower the 501c3 industry from a fund development standpoint, but to also create new opportunities for people that they might not have thought were possible. So someone who's a startup founder, if we educate them that, hey, if you don't have the end potential of having a $100 million company sold somewhere as a stockholder, but in exchange for that, you could make a really good salary and you wouldn't have any of the burdens and the pressures that a stockholder would have on your company. Take, for example, Lyft right now with the employees versus contractors. That is a whole new opportunity that is currently just a black hole because of the perception of what the 501c3 industry is. Now, all the charities use the 501c3 tax code, but there's very few people using that tax code to do possibly what would be considered non-charitable work. So, yeah, any questions on that?
No, I think that was a lot, and it was really, really comprehensive in your approach to answering it. So I appreciate that. Aisha, do you have any other questions?
I am trying to think of one because I feel like we covered a lot in such a short amount of time.
Well, we have a great webinar series on the cogeo.us/library where you can go in and listen to, on each segment of the House of Development, in-depth review of that. Highly recommend doing that if you're at all interested in learning more about fundraising and starting on some of the tactics that incorporate that opportunity. Additionally, we have industry-specific presentations that we could pass along to anyone who would be interested in. We've delivered it the last 3 years at the U.S. Soccer Coaches Convention to an increasingly growing crowd, which has been a good indicator for us. The first year we did 2 sessions each year, one with overall tactics, and then the second one is case studies to give people real examples. Each year they've grown double-fold. I mean, at first was like 25, 30, then 60, then it was pushing 100. One of the larger breakout sessions at the entire convention. And I think that's how we got connected originally even. So if anyone's interested in that type of information, we'd be more than happy to provide it to them. Additionally, if anyone just wants to talk to us, we're very approachable. We won't charge for that. I want to make it very clear. We're on a mission to bring what we've discussed today to the awareness of the masses and make it something that becomes known in a commonplace rather than something that still is very nascent to a lot of people, but yet is a tool and tools that can help them achieve all the things they want and more as an organization.
Yeah, we will pass all of that on through our newsletter to our community, and pass it on to other people in the area as well, because I think these conversations are so important to bring about change and to really move everything forward, whether it's sports related, whether it's 501c3 related. Everything needs to move forward. And I think that these types of conversations are the beginnings to help affect that change.
Absolutely. And I think there's so many areas to be passionate about right now and always. These tools are applicable to any of those areas. And so whether it's you're doing it yourself or you have a family member or a person that you are close with that is trying to figure out what to do in a different sector, this is incredibly valuable to them. I know we're talking about clubs and academies today, but that's another important takeaway for your audience, I think, is that it is applicable here and it's applicable to any sector as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we can open it up for questions. I know people in the audience are probably, got brains coming out of their ears from all the information that we've given out. So if there's any questions from the audience, we can take those now. But we really appreciate you guys taking the time to come on and talk to us and talk to our community about this.
This was
absolutely. While we're waiting for any questions to come in, another statement: you don't have to be in a wealthy community to be successful in fundraising. We've done a lot of work in socioeconomic areas that the affluence piece is low for the individuals in the club. One of the best examples of that is our work with the Alameda County Deputy Sheriff's Activities League. They're out of Alameda in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And they were able, with our work, to attract over $4.5 million in the 3 years that we worked with them for facilities and program support. And not a single dollar of that really came in a major way from the individuals involved. That was through foundations and that was through local government. So as a great example, as a case study, we were able to, and it's extremely timely, and there's a gentleman out there who's just an absolute, I don't know the right word to use, but he's just a phenomenal person, Nick Lesson. He's the athletic director there, and the program, he's also involved with NorCal Premier, governing body. The program, though, that he works with they call it DSAL, they work as a community organization to bridge the gap between police and the community using sports. And this was 3 years ago that this program really took off in this way. And they've seen phenomenal results in doing that. And so when we went out and made the case to the local governments and foundations, it was, hey, not only can we promote, which is the most important, the safety and the connection between officers and the community, but you can also, from just a pure financial standpoint, save a lot of money because you're avoiding having to spend money after the fact on trying to police things or trying to do things that are going to cost a significant portion of your budget and don't contribute to the trust of your community. And so the message I want to give is that there are ample opportunities, even if you're not in a wealthy demographic, to take advantage of these tools and tactics. It's just different than, say, the wealthy demographic of a San Francisco club. Yeah. But it is absolutely possible. And in some cases, even more compelling to those institutional funders, companies, foundations, governments, than an organization that has the capacity within their club.
Yeah, DeSalle is in Oakland. Alameda is Oakland, which is arguably the most impoverished area other than Watts in California.
Yeah. You guys have done a lot in California. What are some of the other areas that you've kind of touched in? I know Rob was saying you guys are doing stuff with Orlando right now.
Yeah, so Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Union has a youth academy called the YSC Academy.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible organization. It's a full-time academic and athletic development academy for 8th to 12th grade boys. They're looking to go into girls as well. The founder of the union, Richie Graham, started the school, and 95% of their attendees are on full financial aid, which think independent school, $35,000. So that was in Philadelphia. We worked with a club in Clarksville, Tennessee, another in Ohio, Northern California. We've done a lot of work there. Rob, where else, from just a club standpoint? There's many other places for other sectors, but where are some of the other ones I'm forgetting?
Well, Chicago Lions, rugby, Wilmington Rowing Association, and here I'm going beyond soccer. We're working with another group in Oakland called SPAT, which is about empowering Black high school girls and boys in academics and athletics, which is a really amazing organization, spaat.org. And then Patrick mentioned USA Triathlon, USA Wrestling. Those are both in Colorado Springs. Yeah, so it's been interesting to watch who's actually coming into the market. And the trend we're seeing, much like with the two of you doing this webinar, it's all about people, leadership, who are catalyzing and boards, right? So you have board members who are ultimately making the ultimate decision on whether to adopt any of this. Right. And so let's talk about Orlando City, since you mentioned them. We began conversations with them more than 2 years ago after the, I think, Chicago convention. And Laura and Paul didn't have the right board at that time. They were really enthused as executives, but they just didn't have the board support. And then there was board turnover last year, particularly one executive who's with the Orlando City Major League Soccer team. And the whole paradigm shifted because 3 individuals came on the board who said, you have to do this. And so now we're under contract. So it's really interesting to see how people are making decisions and who the influences are and how we're penetrating.
Yeah. You guys are coast to coast.
Yeah, coast to coast, which makes it fun. And ironically, with this, with this crisis, my last flight was doing a NorCal presentation at their annual assembly in late February. We're still talking to a lot of clubs, and so that's good news. The pandemic has not at all lowered people's appetites for a lot of what we can do with them. So it's good.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have had more time to kind of sit around and figure out, oh, this is what I need to be doing with them. So it might even increase.
No, we've seen that. It's been 2 cases. One, as you just described, or it's sitting down and frantically saying, we have no other option. And I wish we would have done this earlier, because this would have given us the diversity in our revenue stream that would have allowed us to ride this wave. And to that point, the clients and nonprofits in general, 501c3s, that had the opportunity to do development work and build their communities before the crisis, those are the ones that have been able to better manage when their operation revenue has been cut completely for this time, and ride this out, because those communities have really stepped up, and we have done a lot of work in helping them engage their communities at this time, and it's been phenomenal. And then also we've had over about 300 conversations with clubs all across the country. So a lot of conversation, but generally the data shows that the coasts have been heavier, with a few innovators in the middle of the country that have really come on board, which actually correlates a lot to the soccer communities of where a lot of the talent comes from, ironically. But I think that having the development work in place for those that aren't those places, it's opening up new opportunities for them, and giving them new environments to do better. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So we haven't had any questions roll in. We have covered a lot more information while we were waiting for questions, which I think is great. Aisha, do you have any kind of closing remarks, or do you guys have any questions for us? Or
yeah, closing remarks. I thought this was super informative. I'm already thinking of different ways we could integrate that house structure into our own marketing plans. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. And we have a person on our team named Mel, who's our marketing specialist. It sounds like that is a lot of your background. I would encourage you to have a direct conversation with her, because she'll be able to articulate this even 10 iterations further in a marketing capacity than we can. And I think that would be a really empowering conversation. There's also some different tools on our website that provide checklists and just things to think about if you're starting, or just giving you a starting place, right, to entering into this whole new world of education. We're very passionate about education, about this, and in education in general. So if there's anyone that wants to learn more, just ping us. That's part of our mission as a company. So thank you for the opportunity to be on with you today, and you had some really great questions, and really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're gonna stop our stream. Oh, Aisha,
Yeah.
our final slide before I finish this stream. I always forget about this one. Just we have to do our due diligence. Here we go. So thank you to our sponsors, Leveling the Playing Field, for equipping us, balls, cones, jerseys, things like that. One Step Beyond Fitness for taking care of our physical conditioning as well as our spiritual and mental conditioning, and B&G Custom Screen Printing and Embroidery for taking care of all of our apparel, from kits to t-shirts to hoodies and beyond. Thank you for joining us on our 11th episode, and we will see you next time.